don'tSprayPesticideAlert.org, or when we're working on statewide programs, same website, but you can get to it as don'tSprayCalifornia.org. A lot of history. I wanted to address this issue, the issue of synergism, which is just now seeming to get a little bit of play, but we've been talking for decades about the fact that glyphosate is just one chemical in a mix of chemicals. And you could remove glyphosate and just slip in one of the other toxics that's, in the pipeline, and you're always going to have a synergistic mix. Glyphosate isn't used alone. So what a synergism, the kind of walnut shell version is that you create something that is greater than the sum of the individual parts. And so some people sometimes want to talk about higher levels of toxicity when you have a synergistic mix. We remind people that it's the cumulative doses that we are getting over time that can be considered to be the more important way to look at pesticide exposure. For instance, if you start off relatively healthy at least, if you have one major exposure, our bodies are built to detox. And so, your liver, other organs will get involved in trying to get that back out. We heard about the skin before. Your body will work very hard to pump out those toxics. But when you are exposed over time, even if it's what people think of as small amounts, I'd say it's a faulty way of thinking, but still, when over time you're repeatedly exposed, as you are with any of the statewide pesticide programs, as you are in the schools, in your workplaces, in daycare centers, on the streets, and medians, and so on, you're getting continual exposures, and they are accumulating in your body. And we have so much disease of inflammation, we have so many endocrine-disrupting metabolic diseases in our society, and so many people dying at young ages for a supposedly, industrialized country with all these resources. That's one thing to keep in mind. The Healthy Schools Act was brought up, or maybe not with that name. How did the Healthy Schools Act kind of go into place? It went into place with a bunch of these glossy brochure nonprofits. A lot of people have heard the big names that get into the media. You need to understand about those groups. I've been working in this realm for decades. That while they bring together a lot of important data that we need to see, they always finish their reports with, therefore, we have to reduce the use of pesticides. Now let me ask you with what you've heard so far today, do you want any of that toxic stuff in you or in your kids, your loved ones? Any?
Nope.
I would say the same. I grew up with my dad, who was a farmer in Colorado, and as I was growing up, I heard about what they did. When he was born in 27. They did crop rotation. They left areas fallow for a period of time. They did rotation of crops. That was just natural. And guess what? They made a living. So we have to go back to older ways, right? The knowledge is there. It's been suppressed. It's coming back. But the Healthy Schools Act got through because politicians could stomach this idea of reducing use. It has no legal meaning. None. It means nothing. I went to, after the Healthy Schools Act did get through, I went to a meeting at the county agricultural department. This would have been 2001. None of the groups that signed the Healthy Schools Act that we were protesting because it did not give actual legal guidelines of stopping use, none of those groups was represented. They didn't care. They got their win, their winnable goal, which they then use on their grant applications. So they keep their bureaucracies going, but we don't see major changes. But what they did is they got out into the media, oh yeah, we got the Healthy Schools Act passed. Talk with almost any parent. If they've ever heard about the Healthy Schools Act, they'll go, that's great, fabulous, our kids are safer. They are not safer, and I would argue they are less safe because people have been misguided into thinking that they're safer. There's been no change in most school districts. Even in environmentally, you're talking about some change, but prior to recently, even in, environmental activist rich Berkeley, pesticides are used in many places, in schools, and so on. So now, I want to talk about sort of a strategy that Monsanto has used. So Monsanto, oh gosh, I guess it was the year 2000 or so, Monsanto was hosting, as they do, their educational fora for farmers, is how they put it. So they were doing one in Santa Rosa, and a lot of us from Sonoma Pesticide Alert showed up. Who was there representing Monsanto? A guy named Martin Lemon. Now, what was his strategy then? He's telling all these people who are doing conventional toxic growing, he says, we've gotten out so much media about Roundup being dangerous. He says, well, but glyphosate doesn't cause cancer. Now, there was less knowledge on the books then about glyphosate itself, but the product and the surfactant were associated with cancers. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And this is, we knew that all the way back in the 80s. So he's saying that as a strategy to confuse people, right? Monsanto has used strategies to confuse, and what they're using as a strategy to confuse now is, okay, we're going to get rid of Roundup. You think they're going to get rid of toxics? No, they just have been building over these decades as we've been getting out more education, more knowledge. They have simply been developing other formulations, other names, or now they're bringing back dicamba. People think it's new. It's not new. It's just to bamboozle us all. So we won't be bamboozled, but how do we help our loved ones not be bamboozled? Part of what Monsanto, what Bayer, what others do, Bayer has a very big and important, dangerous place in this state. They are part of all the statewide pesticide programs. If you hear the word invasion or invasive, perk up your ears. This is marketing from the pesticide industry saying, oh, this insect or this plant or this tree is invasive. We've got to get rid of it. What's the answer? Always pesticides. Now in these statewide programs, blue-green sharp, light brown apple moth,
medfly,
wing sharpshooter,
medfly,
all these various different programs. Imidacloprid from Bayer is used. It's an insecticide. It's a dangerous insecticide. It's killing off bees as well as harming people. And it was all the way back in 2001, I think was the final point in France, where it was actually banned for use. There it was called gaucho. The product was called gaucho. Here in the statewide program, the product has been called Marin. It doesn't matter which product. Here, here's one of the chemicals, and it's coming in a mix, a synergistic mix. So I will leave it at saying we need to accept no pesticide use. There is no safe use of pesticides. It's a wrong approach. We need to come in under and see about how we support the land, how we support life. And don't go against life and try to kill. It's a failing strategy in all respects. We don't need to accept it. It's profitable, but it's a failing strategy in terms of controlling any problem. It doesn't work. Right now we have like the trees being attacked in the hills as invasive. They actually are fire safety friends. And this is it's pesticide companies behind this, because the deal is, and a lot of us have been working on this since the mid-2000s, they're saying, we've got to get rid of the eucalyptus, Monterey pines, and so on. Well, those trees are collecting fog drip and keeping the soil moist. They create fire breaks sometimes in the hills. In the hills, the fire was following gas lines, jumping from house to house, and from appliances to cars and so on, and eventually things get hot enough anything will burn. Don't buy the hype, but their idea is that you cut down all the trees, so lumber barons are going to make a lot of money, and then you use pesticides for 10 years minimum in every spot that has been cut. So instead you get grasses, and you get more flammable hills. So just think about that. You hear the word invasive or invasion, do a double take and find your resources for understanding. One resource around the trees and pesticides issue is the Coalition to Defend the East Bay Forests. And we can give you more information about that.
People are invasive.
So I dressed up special for today. And I'm speaking to you today as environmentalist and an injured worker, and my speech is about 5 minutes long. And if you're getting really bored, you can raise your hand and I'll try to cut it short, but I think you'll enjoy what I have to say. Hopefully it's unique. First, about the t-shirt. So a couple years ago I got breast cancer. When you get breast cancer and you get a mastectomy, they give you these prosthetic breasts to wear. Most people wear them underneath their clothing. That tends to hide the extent of the problem, and since I was already really mad about chemical pollution, I decided to take that prosthetic breast and make art. So I made this protest t-shirt, and I think you can see it, but in case you can't, I will read it. Pesticides, so many breasts, so little regulation. So I'm not saying that Roundup causes breast cancer, but I mean, who knows, really? But what I am saying is that Roundup is everywhere. It's in our bodies, it's in our breasts, and the failure to protect, to regulate pesticides is definitely causing a cancer epidemic. But the problem with pesticides, it's not just about cancer. Sure, I miss my left breast. I mean, who wouldn't? Yes, my wife misses it too. But I've been much more affected in my life by a different environmental illness. After 30 years of construction work, I began to get sensitive to even small amounts of chemicals, to chemicals in building materials, cleaning products, and pesticides. Some medical professionals now estimate close to 20% of the population feels such sensitivity. This condition is called multiple chemical sensitivity or chemical intolerance. But the problem with that language is this. It focuses on the individual, like it's my problem, I'm intolerant. Disability rights activists have taught us that the medical model of disability distracts us from the real location of the problem, which is often political and social. Decades ago, visionary wheelchair users demanded access, refusing to accept barriers that were literally set in concrete.
Right on.
Likewise, those of us who have been chemically injured demand universal protection. We want to fully participate in the community. We want freedom from chemical pollution. We are not sensitive individuals. We have been injured by chemicals intentionally introduced into our air, water, soil, and bodies by greedy corporations like Monsanto. Okay, today I'm representing a group, small but fierce, the Forest Action Brigade. Okay, so because we're trying to think globally and act locally, we've set our sights on 2 local goals. In our beloved East Bay Hills, we want an end to the clear cutting of trees, and we want a no pesticide policy, period. This coming fall, you are all going to have a chance to vote on these questions. The East Bay Regional Parks needs voter approval to fund park activities. We are opposing this funding renewal known as Measure FF. Sadly, I want to point out that large environmental groups now support pesticide use in the parks, and I'm going to name them.
Yes.
The Sierra Club, Audubon Society, Save the Bay. Because,
They're all run by the same.
why? Because they have adopted an unscientific and outdated philosophy, one rooted in nativism and stoked by fear of invasion. In 1963, it was Monsanto that wrote the chemical industry response to Silent Spring, Rachel Carson's groundbreaking work. It was called The Desolate Year, and it conjured, and I quote, a terrible year of the insect and rodent and weed, how the termites felled innumerable buildings, wiped out a library, oh my God, how the great forests wilted. Okay, the message here being, if we don't use pesticides, they will take over. For many decades, Monsanto has been using fear to sell poison. Please don't fall for it. I know you won't. So, even though the East Bay Park managers use IPM, that's Integrated Pest Management, when you hear that word, you should worry, because the track record is not good. IPM programs mean nothing, and they're basically greenwashing. Even bans on Roundup are not enough. Because you know what? We're really done playing whack-a-mole with pesticides. Our regulatory system is broken. Just forget the EPA. We demand protection from state and local officials. So here's our chance. We speak for workers, chemically injured, for cancer patients, for air breathers and water drinkers, and not just the humans, for the trees, the owls, the eagles, the monarch butterflies, and the bees. We are interdependent. This is solidarity. And please vote no on Measure FF.
People over profits.
People over profits.
Stop poisoning us.
Stop poisoning us.
People over profits.
People over profits.
Stop poisoning us.
Stop poisoning us.
People over profits.
People over profits.
Support the fiscal boycott.
Support the fiscal boycott.
Support the fiscal boycott.
Support the fiscal boycott.
Stop poisoning us.
Stop poisoning us.